Our YouTuber back, course talking FF7. Another day, another Hamaguchi interview. This guy's doing a ton of interviews here lately. Another one with SquareEnix.com where he talks about Gongaga, a little bit about Zack, talks about the Tifa Cloud dynamic, the kind of comedy in the game, the additional stuff that's been added to like the original FF7 story and stuff like that. It's a relatively short interview, but there's a lot of good little bits in here to talk about, so let's hop into it. The game features many new details and additional scenes that enhance the original Final Fantasy VII story. Why was it important to add these for Rebirth? All that is really down to the intent and the desire of our main story writer, Kazushika Nojima. He really wanted to go deeper into those areas of the original Final Fantasy VII that were optional, so that includes characters like Yuffie and Vincent, but also Gongaga. That was one of those areas that you didn't have to visit if you didn't want to. The decision was made fairly early on that those parts would go into the critical route of the game, become an integral part of the story. We would use those elements and the idea of going deeper into the regions to give players a much greater understanding to the world of Final Fantasy VII. So while Hamaguchi does say that the additional shit they added to the game, like Gongaga, Vincent, Yuffie, stuff like that, adding them to the story, is mostly up to Nojima, and I'm sure that's true to a certain degree. Like, you kind of can't make that stuff optional like you could back in the day, right? For one, you already gave Yuffie a DLC when it comes to the remake project, so it would have made sense to hop into Rebirth and her be like an entirely optional character. You had to find a way to squeeze her in there, right? And kind of the same thing for the character of Vincent, right? Even though he doesn't become part of our team until like much later in the game, and he's not even a playable character yet, he's obviously very integral to like the entire plot of FF7, and he has his own damn post FF7 game with Dirge Cerberus. So while those two characters were optional with the original FF7, they were never going to be optional when it comes to the remake project. So it's not really like, again, I don't want to say like it's not Nojima who had like some say in that, but it's like obviously they're going to be put into the story in some way. And a somewhat similar thing when it comes to the location of Gongaga, right? Because the way that the remake games are and like the way Rebirth is formatted, you couldn't have entirely optional locations, right? Entirely optional regions. Like Gongaga was a place that you just pass by if you wanted to with the original FF7. You can't really do that with the way that Rebirth is structured. Again, they had to find a way to kind of put Gongaga into the story. I will say, technically, with the original FF7, Gongaga is not 100% optional because you are forced to go there at one point in the story. Whenever like Cloud wakes up after smacking around Aerith a bit, right? And she makes her way to the Sleeping Forest and obviously to her ultimate demise. But besides that, you can technically walk by it on your way to Cosmic Canyon. I don't know why anybody would, but you can. You could kind of count like Meridian Ocean and Gilgamesh Island as like an optional region because you do go to it in the story, not necessarily Gilgamesh Island, but the ocean. You don't have to do that shit, but it's not really like the same as like other regions, right? Would have been cool to have entirely optional regions in Rebirth for sure, and maybe that's something they can do with the third game, right? Because there is a lot of the world left to explore. We still have all of the northern continent and like the Midil section down low. A lot of that's gonna be part of the story, obviously, but then there's all kinds of like islands out there in the water, a round island with Knights of the Round and shit that they could turn into like maybe its own little tiny region. It doesn't have to be like super, super big. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, in a lot of ways, some of the things I was looking forward to the most when it came to Rebirth was how are they going to incorporate what was optional in the original FF7 into the main story, like Yuffie, Vincent, and I guess technically Gongaga. And I think for the most part, they did pretty damn good. Zack Fair is a good example. Zack is a really major character in Rebirth. He plays a much bigger part in the story than in the original game. So Gongaga being where he's from was a place we really had to look at and talk about if we wanted to show more about Zack. So I think it's thanks to Mr. Nojima and his decision to look further into these areas that we can also use these moments to dive really deep into the other characters as well. For example, in the Gongaga region, we see more about Tifa's internal feelings and her emotions at that point in the story as well. You guys already know when it comes to the additional Zack stuff with Rebirth and even the little bit we get with Remake, absolutely love that shit. Favorite character, so I'm always going to be down for that stuff. Even though we don't get like, in some ways, we don't get like a ton with Zack because most of what you do with Zack whenever you like flash sideways, I guess, to take a Lost reference, it's just like a cutscene sometimes, and every now and then you're walking from A to B essentially. You do get to obviously control Zack and fight with Zack at the very beginning and towards the end of the game, which is fantastic. I still love that shit, even though we don't technically get to like play a lot with Zack, if that makes any sense. If I could critique the Zack stuff a bit and kind of add my personal thoughts on that, I think it'd have been a good opportunity since we're back in Midgar, we're controlling Zack, this is brand new stuff, is being able to like see other sectors. It's something I've been talking about on the channel for a very long time, is that we're pushing to the 30-year mark for FF7, and there's still sectors within Midgar that we've never ever got to see or explore when it comes to like the lore. Like sector like 2 and 3 and 4, I believe. I think we might have briefly gone to sector 4 with the original FF7, I think when we parachute back in, but obviously we can get to explore sector 4. And that's something that would have been kind of interesting with Zack, just to like give us more of Midgar. Actually, something else I could add to the Zack stuff, it's something I noticed on my initial playthrough of Rebirth, and then I noticed it again here on the second playthrough. Actually, something else I could add to the Zack conversation is it's something I noticed on my initial playthrough of Rebirth, and then I noticed again, playing back through it on hard mode now, is they could have had Zack like acknowledge Tifa's existence like one time, right? Because he does see Tifa and the rest of Avalanche on like the news or whatever. When he first goes into Sector 5 and he has Cloud in his arms, he sees Aerith and wants to go save her, right? He sees Tifa there. He sees Tifa on the wanted poster when he's looking for Biggs, but he never once goes, holy shit, is that Tifa from Nibelheim, the little cowgirl or something like that? Just one time, one little line. It's kind of like weird that they didn't have that be a thing, because he definitely knows who the fuck Tifa is. My only thinking is that maybe they wanted to avoid certain spoilers when it comes to the FF7 story until the third game, of course, but at the same time, like, Crisis Core Reunion exists. Also, they let you know that Zack was a part of the mission at some point in the story when you go to Nibelheim, right? When Cloud has like the flashback thing upstairs in the inn, he remembers who Zack is. They show you Zack floating down the river, so you know Zack's a part of it. But of course, also all the events of the Calm flashback were Zack to a certain point, right? So Zack has a pretty good relationship with Tifa. Like the entire like journey from Nibelheim up to the Nibel reactor is Zack. Zack's there. Zack's with Tifa for the entire thing almost, right? So it's just kind of like frustrating that they never gave Zack a line of like, holy shit, that's Tifa. So they make it a point to show you in the game that Tifa knows who Zack is. Once y'all get to Gongaga, like Tifa and Aerith are trying to see if Cloud knows who Zack is or remembers Zack or something along those lines, right? And obviously he doesn't, but it's like they let you know that Tifa knows who Zack is, and we know that Zack knows who Tifa is, but there's never like a Zack line about that, right? I don't know. It's probably not that big a deal. I'm probably talking too much about it, but it's just something I thought of this playthrough. Getting back to Hamaguchi's answer where he talks about Tifa's internal feelings, I assume he's talking about the livestream sequence where she gets swallowed by the weapon and we see her traveling the live stream and getting to like kind of relive what actually happened in Nibelheim, because she's also forgot a little bit too, right? It's not just Cloud who's forgot stuff. A very powerful scene and something I wasn't actually expecting, which I loved. How difficult was it to balance the new additions with the structure of the original game? A lot of the changes to the original story were laid out very early by Mr. Nojima in his original story. He planned which character we'd go deeper into at which point in the story. There's a very solid line that we worked from. But of course, when going through the process of taking that story and translating it into a game experience, there were some areas where we thought that, okay, we've tried it here, but the way it's written in the original story doesn't really get the same emotions across. If something doesn't have the impact that we're looking for, we need to change things and adapt it to work better as a piece of interactive entertainment. So to give you an example of that, there's a specific scene where Cloud, Barret, and Red 13 go to the Gongaga Mock Reactor, and Tifa, Aerith, and Yuffie follow after. There's a scuffle between Cloud and Tifa, and she falls into the live stream. We then get to see more of her inner world. That was a scene I asked to be changed. It wasn't like that in the original plan. The party went together to the Mock Reactor, and then Tifa would have fallen into the live stream. I realized that for the story to work as a game, and for the individual character development, we needed to have Cloud's party as the vanguard, Tifa's follow on and catch up later. That way you get the powerful effect of Cloud's struggle, and then the impact of Tifa falling into the live stream through gameplay. But as I said, the vast majority of the emotional journeys were planned out by Mr. Nojima. There were only a few areas like that where we suggested little changes and alterations that could deliver his intended message and work better as a game. There's obviously kind of a lot to read. I will say, I do love the Gongaga section. I love what they added to the story there. I don't think you necessarily had to split up the teams to make it more impactful as a game or whatever Hamaguchi's reasoning was. I think you still could have done exactly everything that happens there if the entire party just traveled together, because then it's almost weird that like we leave and they stay back at the village, and then as soon as we get done with our shit, like all of a sudden like, the team's going there to the reactor too, and it's like we should have all just gone together. Don't get me wrong, I love the moments in Rebirth where they split up the party and they kind of force you to use different like team combinations, maybe characters that you normally wouldn't party together, and getting to see them like interact with each other since it's just like that team of 2 or that team of 3 or whatever. That's great stuff. But I just feel like you could have achieved kind of the same thing in Gongaga if the entire party just went to the reactor together. Putting all that aside, though, like the Gongaga section, especially when Cloud's like starting to be a little manipulated, starting to act like Sephiroth a bit, slaughters the soldiers. One of my favorite moments in the entire fucking game. I absolutely love that shit. Kind of in general, just like the manipulated Cloud segments in Rebirth are some of my favorite moments in the game, just because we know Cloud's the good guy. He's the hero. He's the protagonist, and you don't often get to see the good guy, the main character, doing bad stuff in games. It just doesn't happen super often unless they're like an anti-hero or some shit, right? So it's really nice to see those different sides of Cloud that we know he wouldn't be doing if he wasn't manipulated by Sephiroth, of course. Let's talk more about Gongaga. What Tifa sees in the live stream echoes the original game, but it's been brought forward in the story. Why was this done? The reason it was put there was because it was meant to link to the next area of Cosmo Canyon. It's subtly setting up the scene where the characters are all around the campfire and they're talking about their past, where they grew up, their worries, and their fears. It helps make Tifa and her emotions that she shares at Cosmo Canyon that much deeper. Kind of interesting with the Tifa livestream sequence in Rebirth. It's something that I half called a little bit when it comes to the next game, the Remake project, because I talked about for a long time Cloud learning the truth of like who Zack is and all that other stuff sooner, and then we didn't fully get that when it came to Rebirth. But Cloud does eventually remember who Zack is in the story, and I was thinking that we might get like the live stream sequence earlier in the story, because it doesn't necessarily have to be Midil, right? Cloud can be broken mentally, and like him and Tifa can fall into the live stream literally anywhere in the world where there's like a direct path to the live stream, right? It doesn't have to be specifically in the town of Midil. If they were to change that, I don't know what they would do with the location of Midil, but my whole point was that it didn't have to be that specific location, right? Obviously, we didn't get that, but we got a similar thing with Tifa, right? Where we got a live stream sequence that's quite reminiscent of the live stream sequence with Cloud and Tifa in Midil. So your boy gets like half a point for that one, right? We were almost there. We were close, but not quite. But yeah, like I said previously, the sequence with Tifa inside the weapon, absolutely beautiful. Like it's so cool to see like a different aspect of Lifestream, because we're kind of getting that with the different world stuff with Zack. And also the whole segment with like Sephiroth, you know, attempting to kill Tifa, stabbing the shit out of the weapon and stuff is insane. Watching the Whisperers fight and stuff, like that was a holy shit moment my first playthrough. And actually, since we're talking about it, that was another thing that I got right when it came to Rebirth, was Sephiroth attempting to kill Tifa. It's something we talked about several times on the channel. I did multiple videos on it, and it was purely based off the simulator vision that Cloud got in Remake, right? Where we see Sephiroth like kill Barret and Tifa, and he follows through on the Barret threat, right? Because we see him stab Barret. Obviously, the Whisper saved Barret, but that was one part of the threat. The other part was the Tifa laying on the ground, right? And I always talked about that he's threatening to kill Tifa. A lot of people wanted to deny it, and then Rebirth happened. So I'm just saying, your boy's got a pretty good mind for this shit sometimes. Only sometimes, though. The scene where Cloud loses control is also shocking. How difficult was it to find how far he could push that without it seeming too much? Cloud is obviously being influenced by Sephiroth, and he's starting to act oddly and do strange things, but one of the ways we grounded him in these scenes is to have Tifa close by. She's there to ground him. He even asked her after Gongaga that if she sees him start to go off the rails, to please pull him back. At the same time, she's got her own worries, so Cloud may be supporting her in a similar way. There's quite an interesting dynamic between the two of them. Look, I know we did a shipping video more or less somewhere recently, and I don't want to be somebody that talks about that shit all the time, but like, come on. When Cloud's at his lowest, there's one character that they specifically chose in the game to be there to help him. According to Hamaguchi, Cloud's there to support Tifa in a similar manner as well, right? Even though Cloud and Tifa are going through very different situations. One of the things that creators ask when remaking something, and not just in games, is how you change scenes. Personally, I think it's very much a case of too many cooks spoil the broth. If everyone's got an opinion on it and how they want to see it, and you listen to everyone, it doesn't go in a good direction. Because we have Mr. Nojima in charge of the story and scenario, we trust him and rely on his judgment. So if it's something people like, such as the way Cloud walked the line there, it's entirely thanks to him. We should be praising his efforts. Obviously a very good point about Hamaguchi that you can't have too many people have an input on stuff, because then like it's going to keep going different directions. Everybody has different thoughts and opinions and ways they want things to be presented, right? So that's why it's good to have somebody like Nojima, who's the main story and scenario writer, and then they can work from there, right? Like he can write down kind of like what's going to happen, what's supposed to happen. They can kind of alter it here and there if they need to. I guess according to Hamaguchi, the manipulated Cloud stuff was, I guess, specifically Nojima, which is great because that stuff was handled pretty damn well. Speaking of praise, one thing I love about the game is that as well as dramatic scenes that we've discussed, it's also very funny. In fact, humor runs throughout the game, and not just in the story, even the synergy attack animations raise a smile. Was this an important focus of the game? I do think humor is important to this game. That said, I don't want to generalize that things with humor are good and things without humor are bad. Both things have their place. But it was an integral part of the original Final Fantasy VII, so Rebirth really had to be funny. That's what players and fans expect and want. And pretty much the rest of his answer is talking about the Barret and Aerith synergy attack, Sweet and Sour Salvo, that has been talked about to death. It's great. It's a cute little attack where she puts on the glasses and stuff just like Barret. It's cute. They talked about it a lot, though. Yeah, everything Hamaguchi said is true, though, right? Because, like, I do like humor in a lot of stuff, but depending on the story, whether that's a video game, a movie, TV show, whatever, I don't necessarily want humor all the time, and if I do have it, maybe very little. When it comes to FF7, whether we're talking the original, Remake, Rebirth, there is a lot of humor, right? But there is also a very serious story being told, and for the most part, they keep focus and let the actual serious moments breathe, except for maybe the dying segment in Rebirth. Like, it is still a very powerful segment. But obviously, after Dying dies, we don't even get a chance to really let that set in. And then we're fighting Palmer, right? It's like, you know, a lot of people complained about that. Palmer shaking his ass on the camera. We're fighting a frog mech, joking around. We're doing a rail shooter out of the back of the fucking buggy right afterwards. And we can't even really let, like, the whole segment that we just went through, with the whole trauma segment we went through with Barret, really, like, set in, right? It's just a weird creative choice that I feel like we needed, like, at least a couple of minutes post Dying's death to, like, really, like, let the shit set in, like, the emotions settle, before we're going into another boss fight and joking around with Palmer, who's just a fucking comedic relief character. It just was weird. Weird choice. But my dude, that is pretty much the video. You remember towards the beginning when I said that it was a relatively short interview? What the fuck happened? Because this video is longer than I expected it to be. What happened? I guess I felt like talking today. But of course, pass off to you guys. What are your thoughts on the Gongaga segment when it comes to Rebirth? Just kind of overall, I guess. We talked about a lot of different aspects of it in this video. Anyways, that's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Search networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @DavidYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Logain, or leave it like Cobain.